Welcome to the Workers' Reading Room. Today I'll be reading Chapter 11 of F.I.S.T. by Joe Eszterhas, but first a quick recap. In the previous chapter, we are introduced to Winthrop Talbot, head of Consolidated Trucking. He and his associates discuss the difficulties they are having in convincing Johnny to work for them. Talbot tells Arthur St. Clair to be more convincing, that eventually they will get their way. Meanwhile, Johnny fails miserably at an attempted first date with Anna, showing up drunk and unkempt and getting the door slammed in his face. Abe, on the other hand, is having the time of his life with Molly, and after taking her to the movies, Johnny pulls up to them and gives them the car, then storms off. Abe then takes Molly home, but shortly afterwards gets viciously beaten by Talbot's thugs, the same thugs who beat Johnny before. Furious, Johnny tells Monahan that they won't be laying down anymore. Later, Johnny and Monahan meet with Winthrop Talbot and his associates in his office, where Talbot refuses to give an inch. Johnny lets him know that his refusal to negotiate will result in F.I.S.T. taking his balls. Needless to say, Talbot was not pleased. The strike was about to begin. And now, F.I.S.T. Chapter 11. A truck came down the street heading for the Consolidated gate. Johnny and the men ran toward it. The guards flung the gate open and pointed their shotguns at the picketers. The driver stopped the truck in front of the gate. "Get in here, damn you!" one of the guards yelled. "It's Bailey," Monahan said. "Bailey?" Johnny said. "Bailey's signed up." The men surrounded the truck, yelling. Johnny pulled himself up one side of the cab, Monahan the other. The driver, a ferret-faced little man, looked scared. "What are you doing?" Johnny said. "We took a vote." I voted no, Johnny." "You voted no? What do you mean you voted no? Jesus Christ, we voted to strike." "Please," Bailey said to Monahan. "I gotta go in there. My wife." "Your wife?" Johnny yelled. "The hell you do," Monahan said angrily. "Nobody goes in there." He jumped down from the cab and stood in front of the truck, blocking it. "You gotta go in there?" Monahan yelled. "Well, come on." Bailey hesitated, then put the truck into reverse and pulled away. The men cheered. Behind the fence, the guards grouped together and withdrew inside the building. Johnny watched them. "I wonder what they're doing," he said to Monahan. At the other end of the line, Higgins yelled out in pain and held his face. Johnny and Monahan ran to him, and suddenly rocks and bolts started falling around them. Some of the other men were hit. "The roof!" Monahan yelled. A half-dozen men stood on the Consolidated roof throwing rocks and bolts at them. The picketers picked the rocks up and hurled them back at the building. Windows broke. "Stop it!" Johnny screamed. "It's a trap!" Police cars and a police wagon swooped down on them as Johnny tried to calm them. The policemen leaped out, billy clubs in their hands, and headed for the picketers. "Hold it, for Christ's sake!" Johnny yelled. The men looked at the policemen and hesitated. Some of them had rocks in their hands. The policemen eyed them warily. "Put 'em down!" Johnny yelled. The men hesitated, the rocks still in their hands. "That's what they want." The men threw their rocks to the ground slowly and waited for the policemen. "We're going to go for a ride," Johnny said. "That's all." The policeman led them toward the wagon. One of them opened the back up and started herding them inside. Monahan looked at the wagon and said, "All of us going in there?" A policeman pushed him inside. Johnny waited at the end of the line. A boy stood there, watching them. "Go up to the office, kid," Johnny said. "Get Abe Belkin. Tell him to bring the bail." The boy watched them being herded into the wagon and said, "How much?" "Huh?" "How much you gonna pay me?" Johnny grinned. "A quarter." "I want $1, the boy said. $1? You're robbing us." A policeman pushed Johnny inside. "Okay," he yelled from the wagon, laughing. "I'll give you $1." Inside the wagon, he was pushed against Higgins, whose face was badly bleeding. They were so close together that they couldn't turn their bodies. The wagon slid through the streets of the flats. "They must have had it planned," Monahan said. Johnny grinned at Higgins' face. "You're going to look awful pretty, Tom." Higgins tried to grin back at him. "They must have been waiting for us," Monahan said. No one said anything as the wagon thudded through the streets of the flats. "Hey," Johnny said quietly, "none of you guys fart." The next morning, they were back. Johnny stood on top of the jalopy with a megaphone in his hands. Abe stood next to the line on crutches. The men walked the picket line. Across the street, a large group of people from the flats watched them. "We're here," Johnny shouted. "We're back. And we're going to stay here." He looked up at the consolidated terminal. "You hear me up there? You beat me up. You beat Abe up. You threw rocks at us. You sent us off to your goddamn jail. And we're still here. And we're going to stay here till we win." The men cheered. When a consolidated truck pulled up to the gate, the men surrounded it. "Jenkins and O'Brien?" Monahan said. "Goddamn scabs!" Higgins yelled. The two men had tire irons in their hands. "We ain't scabs, Mike," one of them said. "We didn't sign up. You know that." The guards behind the fence watched them, but there were so many men on all sides of the truck that they couldn't see what was going on. "We got our jobs to do," one of the men in the truck said. The men yelled at the two men in the truck. Johnny nodded to Higgins. Higgins crouched down and slashed two of the truck's tires. "You want to go in, Jenkins?" Johnny smiled. "Go ahead." The truck drove in with its slashed tires. The men cheered. A police car arrived and two policemen walked up to Johnny. "You're under arrest, Kovac." "Again?" "Disturbing the peace. Malicious destruction of property." "Let him alone," Higgins yelled. "You guys aren't cops," Abe said angrily. "You're scabs in uniform." Johnny grinned. "What are you getting so excited about, Abe?" The policeman led him across the street to their car. As they opened the back door for him, the group of people from the flats yelled at them. Johnny spotted Anna in the crowd and smiled. "He didn't do nothing," Anna yelled angrily. "Let him go." One of the policemen looked at her. "You bastards," she yelled. Johnny grinned. "You gonna let her call you that?" he said to the cop. "You're disturbing the peace, lady," the policeman said to her. "Arrest her," Johnny said. The cop looked at him. Anna stood there stunned. "She's disturbing the peace," Johnny said. "Arrest her." She smiled. The policeman put him into the car and drove away. At Central Police Station, the desk captain said, "Name?" Johnny grinned. "You remember me, don't you, Cap?" "Name?" "Johnny Kovac. I was here yesterday." "Charge?" "Disturbing the peace," another policeman said. "Malicious destruction of property. Consolidated." The desk captain looked up. "Take him over to the lieutenant's office," he said. "Great seeing you again, Cap." Johnny grinned. He was taken to an office where two plainclothes policemen smiled as he walked in. One of them had a blackjack in his hand. "Mr. Kovac," one of them said, smiling. Johnny shook his head. 15 rounds, no gloves, right?" "Wise guy," one of them said. "We got to go up on the third floor," the other said, grinning. "The lieutenant's up there." They took him to a narrow stairway. Johnny stood at the bottom of the stairs. There was no one else there. "Lieutenant's downstairs," one of them smiled. "Run." He ran downstairs and one of the detectives said, "Lieutenant's back upstairs." Panting, out of breath, he looked at them. How long we gonna run? Till we find the lieutenant. That's what I was afraid of, he grinned. The detectives ran him up and down the stairs until he collapsed. They picked him up and dumped him into a cell. It was a brutally hot day and more than 100 men paced the picket lines. Water pails and dippers had been placed on the sidewalk for them. Many were bare-chested and suffering in the heat. Fucking oven, Johnny said, looking at the sun. They're tired, Johnny, Abe said. Thirsty. Hungry. We're probably going to have to stay out here. You know what'd be great? Abe said. Till that old man croaks. Huh? If we get a place, guys could rest, some bread, water, get away from the heat. Johnny grinned. You want to put him in the church basement, Abe? Up in the office? Someplace close. Maybe Talbot'll give us a room. There, Abe said, pointing. Where? There. Johnny looked where Abe pointed, to a weed-grown field catty-cornered to Consolidated. There ain't nothing there. The field, Abe said. What's the matter with you? You got sunstroke? It's empty, Johnny. Johnny looked at him half seriously, grinning. We could put up a tent, set up cots. You're a fucking genius, Johnny said. You know that, Abe? When Monahan got there, they dragged him over to the field. Monahan stood there dumbfounded. We could put up a tent, Abe said. A tent? Monahan said. What the hell? We'll get a bunch of gunny sacks, put 'em together, Johnny said. Get some rail ties down at the yards, Abe said. Get the guys out of the heat, Johnny said. Put some cots in, Abe said. Sleep in shifts. Give 'em some food, Johnny said. I bet Maud even help. Myrtle, Abe said. Sure, Myrtle. Monahan stood there in a daze, looking from one to the other. The whole neighborhood, Abe said. Wait a goddamn minute, Monahan said. Bring in big barrels of water, Abe said. Ice, Johnny said. Some beer, maybe. Beer, Monahan said. What are you talking about, for Christ's sake? Guys are tired, Mike, Abe said. But this, Monahan said, it don't belong to us. Johnny looked at him and smiled. We're going to buy it, Mike. Buy it? Monahan said, astounded. You gotta be kidding. You are, Mike, Johnny said. You're going to buy it for us out of the treasury. Bunch of weeds, Abe grinned. Shouldn't cost that much. It's going to be our own field, Mike, Johnny said. Think about it. Our own field, Monahan said. Holy Jesus, what are you talking about? Beams had been hammered into the ground in the empty field. A group of the men with poles in their hands were trying to balance a large hand-sewn burlap tent over them. Anna and Molly, together with Johnny and Abe, who was on his crutches, were watching them. You like the 5 and dime? Molly asked Anna. It's all right. Sometimes it gets so hot you feel like taking everything off. You oughta, Molly laughed. Yeah, Anna, you oughta, Johnny said. That's all you ever think about, isn't it? Anna said. They laughed and Abe said, It's going to be great, Johnny. We'll bring the mats in, the food. The tent fell to the ground. We got to put the damn thing up first, Johnny said. Abe laughed. But how'd you get this field? Molly said. We didn't even have to buy it, Abe said. It belongs to the church. We leased it. Johnny talked the priest into it. How? By paying him $5. That's how. Near the tent site, a group of women were making lemonade and sandwiches. Johnny saw his mother among them and took Anna over to her. This is Anna, Ma, he grinned. The colored girl I told you about. Anna smiled. I'm Lithuanian, Mrs. Kovac. She looked at her. You, good friend of Johnny's? She laughed. He tried to get me arrested last week. He laughed. She got me a punch in the nose, Ma. Good, his mother said. A smart girl. The tent fell again and Higgins yelled, Will you get your ass over here, Johnny? He ran to help them. For Christ's sake, Abe shouted, watching them. You bunch of clowns. He hobbled toward them on his crutches. Disgusted, he threw the crutches down to the ground and hurried to help them. Molly ran after him. What are you doing, Abe? I'm going to help them, he said angrily. They can't even put a goddamn tent up. Abe, she said. The doctor said, Fuck the doctor. She ran after him as he grabbed the tent. Don't you talk to me like that, Abe. They balanced the burlap over the beams, Molly and Anna helping them. This time we're going to get it, Abe said. Come on, Higgins, watch it. I'm trying. They balanced it carefully over the beams, and Johnny watched Anna's figure as she stood there. She held a pole in both hands, and her body was rigid, extended with effort. The big burlap finally fell over the last row of beams to the ground. In the sudden darkness inside the tent, the men cheered. Johnny grabbed Anna suddenly, roughly, and pulled her close and kissed her. She tried to break free, then let him kiss her. One of the men lifted the flap up. Light flooded into the tent. Johnny let Anna go. He stepped back and looked at her. She smiled. Aren't you going to hit me? He grinned. She slapped him. In the executive conference room on the 8th floor of the Talbot building, Winthrop Talbot said, It's gone on long enough. The mayor said they will give us all the support we need, but we must act. Any possibility of state help? St. Clair said. I spoke to the governor yesterday, Winthrop Talbot said. He is, as you know, running for re-election this year. And after that shooting last year at the auto light plant in Toledo, he is not anxious to get the National Guard involved. It's up to us then, isn't it? St. Clair said. Yes. Specifically, Arthur, it's up to you. You make the necessary arrangements. I don't wish to know the details, but I want this mockery ended. Move boldly, Arthur, at whatever cost. St. Clair smiled. I'll start working on it this afternoon. But maybe if we talk to them again, Philip Talbot said. Discuss some sort of insurance program. His father interrupted angrily. No, they don't listen to reason. They will not break any more of our windows. They will not vandalize any more of our trucks. I will not permit them to interfere with this company any further. But they broke the windows only after... Enough, Winthrop Talbot said. Enough, Philip. That bohunk is not going to put a circus tent on our doorstep. A huge Federation of Interstate Truckers banner was stretched across a makeshift stage in the church courtyard. A violin and accordion band played the zardas and the polka. The courtyard was jammed with people, many of them in native costume. Mishka was there, and Jugovich, the arm wrestler, and Ziggy Zagon, and Monahan, who was trying to learn the zardas. Sausages were being grilled on open fires. Johnny, Abe, Anna, and Molly sat at a table eating sausages and drinking red wine. Johnny's mother sat with them, not far from a sign that said, Help the strike. Bloody nose all the time, Johnny's mother said, looking at him. First I look, see how bad, then I slap to face. She pretended to slap him. Johnny held his face in mock pain. That hurt, Ma. Did he learn his lesson? Anna asked. Never do no good. Next day, bloody nose again. Mule-headed, Anna said, smiling at him. Mule brains, his mother said. They laughed and Monahan came over to them. Hey, Mike, sit down. I gotta go back out to the line, Johnny. If it's okay with you, though, I'd like a dance with this pretty lady here. He extended his arm to Anna, who got up, smiling. He stole my girl, Johnny said to the others. Come on, Molly. She looked at Abe. Hell, he can't dance, Johnny said. Abe grinned and waved them away, and, laughing, they headed for the dance floor. Jocko came up to them. Vince wants to see you, Johnny. We got a union dance, Johnny said, peeved. What's he want? He wants to talk to you." Johnny looked at Molly and grinned. "Tell Abe he's a lucky man." He walked behind Jocko into the street, where Vince Doyle's Stutz was parked. Jocko opened the door for him and he got in the back. Johnny grinned. "We gonna hold hands, Vince?" Doyle smiled and looked away from him. "They're gonna hit you tomorrow, Johnny." "Aw, Jesus, Vince. What are you talking about? I got Anna in there." "All right, you don't want to hear? I'm trying to do you a favor." Johnny looked at him. "Okay, so do me a favor." "They got guards. They got all sorts of goons. We got our guys, Vince. They went down to the yards, hiring hobos. They're getting armored cars." Johnny shook his head. "They're gonna beat you into the ground, Johnny." "Is that it?" Johnny said. "How about planes? They got planes, Vince? Gas, maybe?" "That's it," Doyle said. Johnny yanked the door open angrily. He started out. "Don't say I didn't warn you," Doyle said. Johnny turned on him. "What the fuck you care, Vince?" "You want to whistle past the graveyard?" Doyle said, louder now. "Go ahead, Johnny." "What's it to you?" "Come on, Jocko," Doyle said. "Let's go." Johnny got out of the car. He looked back inside. "What's in it for you, Vince?" Johnny said bitterly. "You give such a big shit?" Doyle looked at him angrily and the car sped off. Johnny walked back to the courtyard where the band was still playing. The music was loud. He saw Anna standing with Monahan. He went up to her and grabbed her hand roughly. "Let's dance," he said. "What's the matter?" she said softly. He led her to the dance area and he didn't answer her. They danced the Zardas. Johnny put his anger into it. He twirled her around more and more forcefully. "Johnny," she said, "stop it." He turned her around roughly. Early the next morning, 4 armored trucks revved their engines at the end of the street by the consolidated fence. Wire screening covered their windshields and radiators. Dozens of shotgunned guards stood around behind them. St. Clair talked to them, then got into a car and was driven away. Johnny stood in the picket line with his men, watching as the 4 trucks pulled up and stopped, one alongside the other, at the end of the street. "What are they going to do with those?" Monahan said. "They look like tanks," Abe said. "I wish we had more guys," Higgins said. "Maybe I ought to go down to the church and see if I can get more guys." Johnny looked at him and grinned. "You're staying right here, Tom." The armored trucks advanced toward them loudly as a phalanx of the uniformed guards, spread side by side across the street, moved up behind the trucks. "We got a picket line here," Johnny said to the men as the trucks and guards headed toward them. "We're going to stay right here." He leaned close to Abe and whispered, "Get the hell out of here." "Like hell. You want to get your leg busted up again? I'm staying right here." Johnny grinned at him. "You're a stupid shit, Abe. What a dumb shit you are." The men grouped behind Johnny as the trucks and guards headed toward them. Around the corner, 2 big consolidated trucks pulled up at the tent. Goons carrying baseball bats and sticks leaped from the trucks. They attacked the strikers by the tent. The men resisted, but they were outnumbered and unarmed. On the picket line, Johnny saw what was happening at the tent and ran with the other picketers to help the men at the tent. As they ran for the tent, the armored truck speeded up and some of the guards fired their shotguns into the air. At the tent, Johnny kicked a goon in the groin. He took his baseball bat away from him and started swinging. Monahan also grabbed a bat off one of the guards and knocked 2 of them down with it. Abe was struck across the legs and yelled in pain. Johnny ran over and knocked the goon down with his bat. Abe and Johnny fought side by side, and as the battle wore on, they were more and more outnumbered. A group of the goons spilled gasoline over the tent. One of them threw a match onto it, and the tent burst into flames. 2 of the armored trucks were parked on either side of the consolidated gate, which was wide open, shotgun guards defending it. Johnny and Abe, fighting off goons, worked their way down the street. A group of goons took turns hitting Higgins with their fists. Higgins, bloody, dazed, got up and was knocked down again. Monahan's bat was knocked from his hand. He was struck across the face with a stick and, bleeding, he ran down an alley to the jalopy. Bleeding and exhausted, he started the car up and pulled it to the end of the alley, facing the street. He saw the tent burning. Smoke was everywhere. Injured strikers lay on the ground. Police wagons arrived and policemen started handcuffing the injured men. Then, as Monahan sat there in the jalopy, he saw a whole convoy of scab-consolidated trucks heading for the open gate. He realized that the strike had been broken. He gunned the car suddenly into the street and aimed it for the gate in a desperate attempt to block it. Policemen, guards, and goons leaped out of the jalopy's way. A guard aimed a shotgun at the jalopy and fired. Monahan's windshield shattered. Monahan screamed. His car crashed into one of the armored trucks. The undertaker stood next to Monahan's body, a pencil and piece of paper in his hand. "What about the next of kin, Johnny?" the undertaker said. "I don't know." "I gotta put somebody down. On the paper, Johnny. It's the rule." "He didn't have no family." "I gotta put somebody down. How about if I put you down? And Abe?" He nodded, said nothing. "What kind of casket?" "I don't know." There was a pause. "We buried your father in a..." "Sure. That's good." Johnny and Abe stood at the end of the alley, watching the consolidated lot. Floodlights shone on it. It was filled with scabs and trucks. The armored trucks stood on either side of the gate. Guards stood inside the fence. The trucks were being loaded. Consolidated was back in business. "Where'd they get their scabs?" Johnny said slowly. "They must have got them from out of town. Got some guys from other companies." Johnny watched the truck being loaded and mumbled, "You're jack shit to me, pal." "What?" "That's the first thing I ever said to Mike." Abe looked at him, but said nothing. "Jesus, Abe." "He believed in it, Johnny." "And they killed him." He paused. "Just like they killed the old man." "Don't you see, Johnny?" Abe said quietly. "He had to go after him." Johnny didn't say anything. "What are we gonna do?" Abe said. "I don't know." "We can't just walk away. What about the guys? What's gonna happen to the union?" He looked at Abe, but he didn't answer him. And that is the end of Chapter 11 of F.I.S.T. Thank you for listening to the Workers' Reading Room. I hope you all have a good day.